Looks like we good.
Hey, Ann, are you there?
I am.
Quick question. Are you, for any reason, going to be asking the participants to chat to each other?
Nope. I'm going to ask them to share something that everyone can see.
Okay, so then I do need to fix that. Okay, I just need to make sure that everyone has access to share with everyone. Right now it's private, so only you and I can see it.
Gotcha.
So I'll change that. All right, it's changed. Thanks. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We have about 5 minutes until we get started, so check those emails, make last-minute phone calls, and we will get started shortly. Thanks to those of you who have joined us already. We will get started with our webinar in just a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our GP Strategies webinar. We're excited to host our third session in our Learning as a Lifestyle series. Today we'll be discussing catching lightning in a bottle, enabling SMEs to create effective learning assets in your organization. My name is Kayla Roth, Marketing Manager for GP Strategies, and I am very happy to be your host for today's event. Before we get started, as always, I do want to cover just a few housekeeping items. First, everyone's phone lines have been muted to eliminate disruptions. And we have a lot of information to get through today, so it's a very short amount of time. 20 minutes will go by fast. So if you have a question during the presentation, we ask that you submit it through the Q&A module. This can be found in the lower panel of WebEx, and we will be sure to address them at the end of the session. Also, if we run short on time, our presenter, Ann, will be addressing questions in a follow-up blog post. This will be emailed to everybody on the call to the email address that you registered with. We also encourage you to share the information you received today with your colleagues and networks via social media. We will also be tweeting live during today's session, so be sure to include the hashtag #GPWebinar or the handle @GPCorp so that we're able to follow your contribution to the conversation. And finally, the slides and recording of this event will be emailed to you. This will likely go out on Monday, and as always, our recordings are available on our webinar recordings page at gpstrategies.com. I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Ann Rollins. Ann Rollins is Senior Instructional Designer for GP Strategies Learning Solutions Group. She has over 20 years of experience developing learning for global companies. She designs and develops instructor-led, virtual, web-based, and blended learning solutions. She also leads and conducts global learning needs assessments and learning strategy development for her clients. She enjoys educating others on the value of including micro and social learning, subject matter expert enablement, and mobile learning components as part of our clients' learning ecosystems. With that, Ann, I would like to turn the session over to you.
That sounds perfect. Great. Kayla, can you hear me?
You sound great.
Wonderful, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. You know, kind of the genesis of this topic and the background of creating this presentation to share is so many times we're working with our clients and seeing commonality across clients and the learning departments and the learning functions. A lot of times we just can't meet all of the needs of the business, and there has to be, and there is a better way. As we engage with our clients, it's critical that as practitioners, we become aware of the challenges that we're facing to stay a strategic partner within the organization. So for our folks who are consultants within your organization, for those who are external consultants who work with a variety of clients, helping to keep the L&D function relevant and able to keep up. And so incorporating some of these do-it-yourself or DIY learning components, as you may see them in blogs, it's kind of a buzzword right now. It includes less formal, more curated, readily available, scalable content that really can create a force multiplier for our organization's ability to access learning. The important thing is we don't want the notion of DIY learning to evoke that it's low quality or less effective. It couldn't be farther from the truth. One method of this do-it-yourself that has huge potential is subject matter expert enablement, what I call catching lightning in a bottle. For folks who are from the South, catching lightning in a bottle is when something magic happens to be able to capture that and replicate it readily and quickly. And that's the topic of our conversation today. So why am I here? Let's see, my animations are not moving. There we go. Why am I here? Industry's changing. Our learning has got to happen as fast as the needs arise. Otherwise, we're going to be marginalized to compliance training. And we need to be able to stay on the edge of business in the forefront. But oftentimes with so many needs coming in from so many different directions, the traditional way simply doesn't work. You know, business is changing as well. The idea and the construct of pulling people offline to complete a single contiguous course is changing. It's not very practical anymore. We need to be prepared to facilitate ready, effective learning in a changing playing field, and in a much more dynamic way in terms of the build-out process. Also, learning teams can't possibly meet all the learning needs in the organization, right? Our traditional instructional design role has us partnering with subject matter experts and going through a very waterfall process, or even in an agile process that requires extensive time on the part of our SMEs and extensive resources in the learning function. People are taking ownership of their learning destiny. You know, people are having these conversations today. Our subject matter experts are sharing their rich knowledge that they have. It's a matter of being able to capture that so that we can scale and share. And we can choose to be part of it and facilitate the learning, or we can stand on the sidelines. And I can tell you for sure, we certainly don't want to do that, because when the operation starts bypassing the learning function and building their own, we really lose the control of the fidelity of the learning, of the quality, and certainly when learning is held to account for business results, if we don't control and have part and are able to facilitate and coach the right way of going about that self-developed learning, we really create a hole for ourselves. So I think about it as taking the funnel and really flipping the funnel. You know, what is any business's most valuable time and resource? The most valuable limited resource is time, right? It's the way that we have to be used to working. The way we've been used to working doesn't work so well anymore, and we've got to change the way we look at things. This creates some questions for our learning practitioners, and we will definitely talk about that. You know, think about how much your organization might be able to save if you could, in a structured way, empower your skilled, brightest to be able to share their tribal knowledge in the moment of need in a way that is clear enough that others can learn from it and be able to replicate the business results. And so we talk about catching lightning in a bottle. We don't want our subject matter experts blowing glass. We want to be able to give them that bottle to capture the magic that they have and to be able to share. So moving forward, we're going to talk about why SME enablement and why now, the process and where I fit in. And determining modality, that's a big one. That's the big question, is how do we actually push this in a way that in my organization it might be able to work? So before we jump in, let's talk really quickly. This is my own definition of subject matter expert enablement. It's creation deployment of a set of tools. They're designed for the industry layman to be easily accessed, correctly used, to broadly and quickly facilitate learning. Okay? And really, I've been supporting organizations in the stand-up of what I call this SME enablement for years, because their learning teams are inundated with needs from all over that they simply can't meet. I'd love to get, in the chat panel, I'd love to get your initial reactions to this concept. Just real quick, if you want to type a single word, I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Initial reaction, empowering, difficult. Living this right now, sorry, not a, considering this move, challenging, necessary, realistic. Yeah, you know, and most of us are probably all quite familiar with Ken Blanchard's Who Moved My Cheese, right? They in that book, these mice, they're moving, the cheese keeps getting moved, and they realize they've got to change or die. And, you know, in many organizations, that is the case. Not that they will die, but they've got business imperatives that must be met, that cannot be met in the traditional way. A couple of folks are living the dream and digging into this topic right now. I'd like to get a sense for your role, for folks who are on the call, and thanks so much for participating. I love seeing that. I'd like to see staff IDs, those of you who might be an external consultant, other roles that you have. If you're a learning leader, I'd like to get kind of a quick feel for who we've got on the call. Okay, looks like we've got some managers, some learning specialists, maybe some trainers, some developers, instructional designers. Great, good blend, good blend. Hopefully I'll be able to address the kinds of questions that you have from your specific vantage point. My role in my career, I have been an instructional designer. I do global learning needs assessments. I do e-learning development, virtual instructor-led development. I manage my own projects in many cases. And so certainly if there is a burning question that you have, I want you to reach out and put that in the question pane, because we'll definitely get to it during the session. So what type of learning is a good fit? We've got tons of learning that happens that is part of the day-to-day business operation. We'll go through a list here. Internal technical training, it's a good fit, right? Our technical experts can provide that richness that we're often missing when non-technicians are authoring the training. So as an instructional designer, I can partner with a subject matter expert, but I'm only going to be able to understand as well as that SME gives me the content there, but I might not have the bigger contextual backdrop that that subject matter expert has. And they really offer a level of richness that learning can miss when we get to internal technical training. Client-facing training is a discussion point. Certain client-facing training would be appropriate to have our SMEs involved in that, particularly for a software implementation. If we have technical people who need training, oftentimes our subject matter experts who an instructional designer in a traditional construct would partner with, oftentimes those are excellent resources to actually author the learning. Corporate compliance. Corporate compliance requires some legal exactness. I shouldn't say some, I should say legal exactness. And there's a rigor and a fidelity that's greater than you might expect in other types of learning. So in these cases, typically partnering with the compliance expert with an instructional designer is going to end up with the best result. For technical skills, our technical experts, they're the closest to the technical skill work that needs shared with the employee community. This is an ideal application for subject matter expert enablement for that approach in your work. For process change is a great fit, particularly changes that affect how technicians are doing their work. A lot of times our subject matter experts are more close to the change and the ramifications of the change than others, and that makes them an ideal resource to tap into to be able to build this kind of learning. And then last, we have new corporate launch. New corporate launch, this type of learning, it touches the broadest spectrum of learners within an organization, right? Often it involves complex communication plans internally and sometimes externally, and given the coordination and multidiscipline finesse that's required for this crisp, timely launch, this type of learning should definitely be left to our L&D practitioners. Let's talk about conditions that need to be present. So the first, thinking about your organization and thinking about how people lead and early adopters. You know, we're looking for an environment where leaders openly communicate, interact, and collaborate with employees to drive business results. There's an open culture. It appreciates that unique strengths that each employee brings to the table. And command and control maybe has been replaced with some trust and empowerment and employee engagement. And leaders also in this, the ideal condition here, leaders recognize that employees' sense of ownership is considered a core business competency and a differentiator. And for those of you on the call who have not read a book, there's a book called Flat Army. It's written by Dan Pontefract, and I'll put it in the QA pane before we close out today. It talks about different types of organization leadership styles and the typical learning construct that works best there. And this book has some wonderful, wonderful information that really, really plays well into this learning approach. The people. Of course, we need our technical experts and our instructional designers. Technical experts are available to provide the content and build it out, and our instructional design and our learning practitioners to facilitate the review and the polish cycles that need to happen, because that piece of the work doesn't go away. And then the next piece is the tools, style guides, templates, narration support. These are fundamentals that empower and enable our subject matter experts so that they can put together cohesive, clear pieces of learning that we can use. Let's see. What questions, thoughts do you have about looking at the conditions that you need to have in place to begin? And for those of you who are living this, do you have the tools in place? Do you have a process that you use? I'd like to see some responses in the chat pane. Definitely from organization to organization. I don't see any responses here, but certainly if you're going about this approach, having a standardized set of templates and tools to use definitely is important, because especially in a global organization, you still want those resulting learning artifacts to look like they came from a learning environment. And creating these templates allows our SMEs to create learning, reducing the time it takes them to do it, It allows them to do it outside of a meeting that happens with you sitting there with them and kind of guiding through. Brian, thanks for that. Who creates the templates? In my experience, it has been the learning practitioner, me, creating job aids for creating a template for PowerPoint and a corresponding job aid that shows people how to use it, that gives them the guardrails, say for one client, 12 to 20 slides per hour of instruction. Job aids that help them to create an activity and think creatively about reinforcement activities. Great. Let's talk about what's in it for the business. We talked about that just a little bit before. Certainly time, right, because it's going to reduce our time to deployment, but it also spreads the wealth a little bit and allows more hands, smart hands, to do the work with our careful tending along the way. Increased content depth. Mentioned this very briefly. Because we have subject matter experts creating learning, the richness that is typically lacking in a traditionally developed program is inherent in the authorship, right? And might need some finesse and some refinement, but typically that depth is much more present in subject matter expert created deliverables. And the third is ownership, right? When sharing technical expertise and practice becomes part of doing the work, there's naturally a shared ownership in its success. And there's increased engagement and citizenship between the experts and the organization. You know, certainly it creates more of a mindset where our people in the organization are going to come to us with a learning need before it becomes crisis. And if we've got the tools to share with them to help kind of self-create the learning to address their problems, we certainly can prevent small challenges from growing into bigger ones. Let's talk about the process now. This looks a lot like our ADDIE model, but it's in plain business language. You know, remember, we're sharing this with subject matter experts, and we don't want them to become an instructional designer or a staff development specialist. What we want them to do is to naturally teach folks to work through different gates along the way with simple tools that follow a simple process, right? And naturally, you know, the first thing that I hear from folks when we deliver this is, well, wait a minute, what about me and what about my job? If they're doing my job, then what am I doing, right? And so traditionally, we would be the owner or the developer of the learning, pretty much beginning to end. And in this model, we really are starting to share some of that ownership, and we're taking on the role of a consultant who facilitates SMEs in the creation of learning, right? I think the key takeaway for learning practitioners who are thinking about applying this approach is this process is your bottle for the lightning that's happening in your world, right? This allows your touch points with your subject matter experts to be minimalist to ensure that you're not a time drain, because that's a complaint that we hear. We want to keep an open door policy so that they don't have to wait for help if they get stuck. Not to become silos and to come to you. That's a great question, Caitlin. We'll take that in the Q&A. An iterative review along the way as well. Thanks, Mike. Moving forward to our modality considerations, of course, when we start talking about our subject matter experts building learning, you know, there are a lot of things for us to consider. I think of them in two buckets. Our primary considerations are our audience size and our learning technology access. And our secondary considerations become, does the learning need to be trackable, scalable, and repeatable, right? Because those factors all affect whether we're dealing with an LMS or not, whether it is going to need to have broad availability and perpetual availability. So let's have a look. The graphic that you're going to see next will help you determine modality and deployment using your audience size and the level of technology available as your drivers. This is a complex slide. You guys are going to get this in the deck that we send out, so I don't want anyone to be thrown by the chart. So on our vertical axis, we've got audience size, low numbers, high numbers, And on the bottom, we've got our learning technology that's available. All right, so from low technology, PowerPoint, Word, moving across over to interactive PDFs and Captivate. We'll talk really briefly about each of these quadrants. So when we look at low audience size and low learning technology, we're talking about things that can be done in person, things that can be done online, tools that can be created by basic automation tools that everyone has access to. So you don't need to worry about technology capabilities and access for your SMEs. Just build the templates in the tools that you have. On the high end here for audience size, a lot of folks don't know that PowerPoint, you can actually record a presentation. It's not super, you can create some interactivity, and they're very low level. It's, not necessarily uploaded to the LMS. It can be put on a SharePoint page, but you can add audio to that. And that's a very effective way, low tech, to reach a lot of people. Of course, some of the traditional things, job aids, step-by-steps. And of course, for all of these, you would have supports and tools to help people to build them out. Moving forward to our lower right quadrant, high technology, low numbers. Again, when we get into this high learning technology available and low numbers, we don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time teaching SMEs to build learning using an authoring tool that's going to take a lot of upskilling. So that's the risk here. So certainly you can keep it low tech even if you're in a high tech environment, particularly where it's the speed to deployment becomes a real consideration if you're in a real hurry to get something out. And in that high quadrant, we have some other tools that are listed using Articulate Studio, Camtasia, Captivate. Some of these authoring tools have enterprise licenses that are not named seated licenses. For instance, some time ago, I was working with Yahoo, and we stood up a SME enablement program for them almost 3 years ago. And they went through a program on the basics of using Captivate. They completed 5 e-learning courses. The shortest was 7 minutes, longest was 13. And once they completed that, they were given a license to create courseware. And I facilitated that process as well as other team members on the global learning team there. Great. Now, the green arrows just indicate that, for instance, in our upper high quadrant across from the left to the right, any of these tools available in high audience size, low tech could also be used, or learning solutions, modalities, could be used over in the right column. So for the low tech also works in the high tech environment. It doesn't have to be high tech to be great. In fact, starting simpler is probably a best approach. Additional considerations that we've got, quality versus control, of course. There's always going to be a balance there. When we have people who are not learning professionals creating learning, it creates automatically a little bit of a struggle. I encourage you to not let perfect get in the way of better. Review and approval cycles. It might not be the same iteration as when you develop learning yourself. It's important to strike that balance that'll work for your subject matter experts. Maybe on your first or second project, you have more review cycles until you're comfortable that they clearly understand what's needed to create an effective piece of learning. For the LMS, upload, test, revise, deploy, it creates its own series of considerations. If we have a vendor who manages all of our LMS upload, that adds cost. If we have our SMEs sending material to be uploaded. So it's just a consideration for you to factor. If it's done internally, is there a process or a job aid or some training that could be given to credential people so that they could do that process on their own? And then the delivery of ILT, of course. With our subject matter experts, really, really important for us to be able to equip them to be able to deliver training well. And so creating it is one part, delivering it is another, and that shouldn't be understated. Helping them to script out what they're going to say when they're delivering their course, making sure that they're staying on track. Our SMEs oftentimes, the greatness that they have is they can talk about it off the top of their head, right? The challenge with that greatness is sometimes talking off the top of their head goes into a lot of things that people don't need to know and really takes them off track. Very good. So what's next? I suggest, this is one tool in your toolbox. There's so much great stuff that's happening in our industry, and this is just one tool. It might not work for all of your internal or external clients, but it might work for one. And I'll tell you what, with a really small pilot, building out some good templates and tools that you can build and expand on with different clients coming to you really helps to create and expand that culture of ownership of the learning. And look where you can identify internal and leverage internal expertise. Think about what's available at their fingertips so that there doesn't require a lot new. And I'd encourage that you look and try your hand with a team that tend to be early adopters and tend to be willing and very participative in their own learning development with you in the past. So now we're at our Q&A. I know that was a lot to give you in a short time. I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Kayla, and then we'll handle some Q&A, gang.
Thanks, Ann. That was a great presentation. I said we had a lot to get through in a short amount of time, so we did go just a hair over. But if you have a question for Ann, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module at this time. We covered a lot in 20 minutes. There's still more information to discuss, and so we encourage you to continue the conversation with Ann beyond today's session. Her contact information will be available in the slide deck, and if you don't mind flipping it to that last slide so we can share your contact. Awesome, with everyone. And let's see here, make sure everyone can see that. And so everybody will also be receiving the slide deck, a link to the recording, and a follow-up blog post where she'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways. Give us a day or two to get that to you, so be patient. And from that, looks like there's a lot of questions coming in. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to get through most of these. I'll probably give it about 5 minutes. If we don't get through all of them in 5 minutes, I will end the recording just to be sensitive to everyone's time, and we will address all of the questions in that follow-up blog post being emailed to you. So we'll get right to it. Our SMEs are so busy and tapped into too much already. How do we access knowledge without asking them for even more?
That's a great question. And that's a question that comes up every time. I think if we could catch that lightning in a bottle, we would all be millionaires because we could mint that. It comes down to two things. It comes down to making the tools and the process as easy for them as possible, like talking off of the top of their head. And it also comes down to, I think, in my opinion, a higher level of sophistication in our consulting skills, making it so that they want to work with us, that we're easy to work with, which means our tools are simple. We take what they give us, and we don't have super high expectations in some cases. With some subject matter experts, I tell them, if you can just fill out this template, stream of consciousness, I'll get you the next template will be the training piece that you can drop it into. And that way I can make sure that they're on track with learning objectives, because that's ultimately, that initial phase of that process to scope and look at the outcomes, that's what that piece is. And so typically if they get anchored early and the tools are easy to use, they are more willing to engage.
Great. Okay, I'm going to dive right into the next one. How do you change the culture from an L&D owns all of the learning to an SME-driven model? I know this is probably on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, that is on a lot of people's minds, and it's a huge culture shift. And in every organization, where I've had the opportunity to kind of bring this approach to the table, it's been a huge culture shift. And a lot of them only make it because they absolutely have to. A couple of clients were over the barrel and they had to do something or they were going to miss big deadlines or competitive edge that they counted on. But I think the best approach to that is you find your champions. In every one of our organizations, we have at least one champion, someone who's willing to try something new. Make it simple, make it easy, and let them help to evangelize. And soon maybe it's not just one, maybe it's 2 or 3. And soon it takes time, but over time that becomes the way of doing work. And it is a shift, but it does take time.
So this one actually kind of ties in well to the question we just asked, but are you seeing a shift from the corporate university to a more decentralized SME-enabled approach?
I'm seeing that as part of it. So almost part of the learning portfolio, because we talk about and we hear about that the 10-20-70 or the 70-20-10 model, some organizations refer to it in different ways. but that 70% that's happening, you know, we need to be able to put some structure around it so that it's meaningful and repeatable. Otherwise, that 70% that every person is going through in a single operating unit, we're not getting what we should be getting for that time spent, right? Because these SMEs are sharing over and over and over. And so really, the SME enablement becomes one of the spokes on your corporate university. And that's definitely, when we socialize that with our clients, that is definitely something that they are looking for and are seeking ways to be able to bring that in a controlled way so it doesn't become the Wild West, so that there is some L&D facilitation of that process. Hope I answered that question. What's next?
How do you manage SMEs to not become silos and get them to come to you?
That's a really good question. When L&D owns the tools and process for building out learning, and typically, if you find an internal champion, I'll give an example real quick. We had a developing team in Bangalore when I spent some time with Yahoo, and literally they would come up with a new way of coding that they needed to deploy to 1,200 developers around the world quickly. And so with a community like that, being able to work with those folks and teach them the process and how to engage, they socialized it. And also, the global learning leaders socialized that regularly, that if you have things you need to be able to share, we've got a great new tool to get the job done. And so that took some communication at more senior levels, but also folks started using it and started sharing, and it kind of had a viral type of growth.
Great. I'm going to take one more question. We have a lot more coming in. Again, I apologize if we did not directly get to your question on this call, but we will be addressing it in the follow-up blog post, so not to worry. All of the insights will be in there. But how do you maintain quality when multiple globally diverse SMEs teach the content and personalize it in the field?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. So if we've got the learning that's created by a specific operational group and it needs to be localized, I think that there might even be an additional set of templates beyond that. I haven't had that specific case, but my thought is, thinking about my experiences, is in creating a course with the delivery, different regional and globalization, you probably would want a community of the SMEs to get together initially to find out what is applicable across the organization and what pieces of that would be something that would be localized to a specific group, and separate that out so that you've got a SME-created piece of learning that addresses the entire audience. And then as there are localized needs, just give them the guardrails for that on what they add, where they add it, if it's applicable in their situation, their environment.
Great. Well, we will get to all the rest of the questions in that follow-up blog post. Please do keep them coming in. I will leave the session open for just a few minutes after we close it out, just so everyone has time to get those last questions in for Anne, just in case you have something you wanted to discuss with her. Again, her contact info is on this slide deck right here, and you will receive a link to the recording and the slides via email. So thank you again to today's speaker, Anne Rollins. It was fabulous. And thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope you'll join us again for our next webinar, Color Outside the Lines of Your Learning Strategy. And this one will be held on May 11th and will be sponsored by ATD. For GP Strategies, I'm Kayla Roth. I wish everyone a great day.
Kayla, this is Anne. Can you hear me? Really quickly, folks, the book that I mentioned is called Flat Army. It's by an author, last name is Pontefract, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat pane. As learning professionals, this is definitely, boy, I'll tell you, it more than piqued my interest to read his book. So I'm going to drop that in the chat pane right now, okay? Thanks so much, gang. I hope you guys have a great day. Feel free to add your questions as you have them before you drop off the call so that we can get those included in the blog post.
Thanks, everyone.